My life was a museum of quiet rituals, each one curated to keep the world at a safe and manageable distance. I was the sole archivist and the only visitor. My apartment, a minimalist sanctuary of gray and white, was the main exhibit hall. My work as a graphic designer, conducted from the glowing rectangle of my monitor, was the research wing, and my routines were the velvet ropes and glass cases, protecting the delicate artifacts of my solitude. Every morning, coffee at precisely 7, the same dark roast, the same white mug. Every evening, the low hum of a documentary about ancient civilizations, a world of dust and echoes that felt comfortably far away. The walls of my life were solid, built brick by careful brick, and I liked them that way. They were predictable. They were safe. Julian was the beautiful, impossible statue in the garden just outside the museum's windows. He lived in 4B, directly across the hall. He was an architect, I think, or maybe a carpenter. He always seemed to carry the faint, clean scent of sawdust and something grounded, like fresh earth after rain. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the heavy bags of groceries I sometimes saw him haul up the stairs. His presence was a low, steady hum in the building's otherwise erratic symphony. When he spoke, his voice was a deep, calm rumble that I could sometimes feel through the floorboards, a sound that seemed to settle the very dust motes in the air. He was, of course, completely and utterly unattainable. This was a fact I had cataloged and filed away with the same dispassionate precision I used for my design assets. The primary evidence was a woman I had seen with him once, a few months after he moved in. She was bright and laughing, and she had looped her arm through his with an easy familiarity that spoke of shared histories and inside jokes. I had watched them through my peephole, a silent, unseen observer, as he unlocked his door. He had looked down at her and smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that made something in my chest ache with a quiet, hopeless sort of envy. I labeled the file straight and closed the drawer. This classification made him safe. He could be admired from a distance, a perfect piece of art I had no intention of ever touching. The admiration itself was a contained, private ritual, another exhibit in my museum. It cost me nothing and threatened no one, least of all myself. My internal catalog of Julian was extensive. I knew the exact cadence of his footsteps in the hall. I knew that on Tuesday mornings, the scent of strong, black coffee would drift from under his door, sharper and more robust than my own carefully measured brew. I knew the soft thud his heavy work boots made when he kicked them off inside his entryway. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear the faint, melancholic strains of a cello coming from his apartment, a sound so full of yearning it felt like a conversation I was eavesdropping on. I would sit in the dark of my own living room, my work forgotten, and just listen. In those moments, the solid walls of my museum felt less like a fortress and more like a cage. I would trace the patterns on my frosted windows, imagining the life unfolding just 50 feet away, a life of warmth and substance and cello concertos that I could only ever experience as a faint, muffled echo. I told myself this was enough. To want more was to invite chaos, to risk cracking the glass on every carefully constructed display. The risk was too great. The quiet was too precious. Then the fire alarm went off, and all the glass shattered at once. It was 2:17 in the morning. One moment, I was adrift in the shallow, dreamless sleep of the anxious, and the next, I was ripped from it by a sound designed to simulate the end of the world. A shrill, piercing shriek that vibrated through the mattress, through my bones, through the very marrow of my carefully ordered existence. For a frozen second, my brain refused to process it. It was a violation, an error in the code of my life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Panic, cold and slick, washed over me. The automated, disembodied voice followed, a calm female announcer detailing the apocalypse. Warning: a fire has been reported in the building. Please proceed to the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. My body moved before my mind did. I stumbled out of bed, limbs clumsy and uncoordinated. The protocol, the plan, the emergency bag I had once hypothetically assembled in my head, it all evaporated in the face of that deafening screech. My only thoughts were a chaotic jumble of noise and fear. Smoke. I couldn't smell smoke. But the alarm was relentless, a physical force pushing me out. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my fingers fumbling with the smooth, cold surface. I didn't think about my keys. I didn't think about my wallet. I didn't even think to put on shoes, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor as I yanked open my apartment door. The hallway was a surreal nightmare. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, painting the familiar beige walls in strokes of sickly orange. Doors were opening, spilling panicked, half-asleep residents into the corridor. The noise was a layered cacophony. The alarm, shouting voices, a baby crying somewhere down the hall. I was frozen in my doorway, a deer caught in the apocalyptic headlights, my mind a blank screen of static. The sheer volume of sensory input was overwhelming. It was too much, too loud, too many people. And then he was there, Julian. His door, for B, opened and he emerged, not with the frantic energy of the others, but with a strange, focused calm. He was already wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his feet shoved into worn leather boots. His eyes, clear and steady, scanned the hallway and found me instantly. He saw the panic locking my limbs, the sheer terror on my face. He moved toward me, cutting through the chaos as if it were water. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, his large, warm hand closing around my upper arm. The contact was electric, a sudden, grounding shock that cut through the noise in my head. His grip was firm, reassuring. It tethered me to reality. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble, barely audible over the alarm, but somehow clearer than anything else. "Come on. We have to go." He didn't wait for an answer. He just started moving, pulling me gently but inexorably with him toward the stairwell. His body was a shield, parting the small crowd of panicked neighbors. He kept his hand on my arm, a solid anchor in the swirling vortex of fear. As we descended the concrete stairs, the air growing colder with each floor, I became acutely aware of the point of contact. The warmth of his palms seeping through the thin cotton of my pajama shirt, the strength in his fingers. He pulled me a little closer as someone jostled past us on a landing, and for a moment, my side was pressed against his. I could feel the solid muscle of his back, smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, a note of calm in the acrid air of alarm. He was real. He was solid. And in the middle of the world ending, he was holding on to me. We spilled out into the cold night air along with everyone else. Red and blue lights flashed across the building's facade, painting our faces in frantic, strobing colors. Fire trucks lined the street, their engines a deep, guttural thrum beneath the still screaming alarm. I shivered, the cold of the pavement seeping into the soles of my bare feet. I was wearing nothing but a thin t-shirt and pajama pants, completely exposed. Julian seemed to notice at the same time I did. His gaze dropped to my feet, then back to my face. A small frown creased his brow. "You don't have any shoes," he stated, his voice laced with a concern that felt startlingly intimate. He released my arm, and for a second, I felt the loss of his touch like a physical blow. But then he was shrugging out of his jacket, a thick, canvas work coat that smelled of sawdust and cold night air. Before I could protest, he was draping it over my shoulders. It was heavy and ridiculously large on me, but it was incredibly warm. The residual heat of his body enveloped me, a protective cocoon against the cold and the chaos. "Thanks," I managed to stammer, my voice thin. "Don't mention it," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd, then the building. "Looks like a false alarm, but they'll be a while checking everything out." He turned his gaze back to me, and it felt like he was the only other person on the street. "You forget your keys?" I nodded dumbly, shame and anxiety churning in my gut. Of course I had. In my ordered life, I never forgot my keys. But this wasn't my ordered life. This was something else entirely. "And my wallet," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, his expression unreadable in the flashing lights. "Okay," he said, the single word carrying an impossible weight of competence and reassurance. "Okay, don't worry about it." He looked around, at the shivering huddle of our neighbors, at the firefighters moving with methodical purpose. It was clear we weren't getting back inside anytime soon. "I have a cabin," he said, his voice suddenly quiet, meant only for me. "About 30 minutes out of the city. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and quiet." The offer hung in the air between us, a fragile, unbelievable thing. My mind raced, trying to process it. Go with him? To a cabin? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. It was a complete deviation from the script of my life. But the alternative was standing here, barefoot and freezing, until some faceless authority figure deemed it safe to return to my cold, empty apartment. "You don't have to," I started, the automatic refusal of a man accustomed to never accepting help. "I know," he cut me off gently. "But the offer's there. My truck is just around the corner." He held my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw no pity, only a simple, straightforward kindness that felt more disarming than any grand gesture. "Come on, Leo. Let's get you out of the cold." He knew my name. The thought hit me with the force of a physical impact. In all my months of quiet observation, of cataloging the details of his life from a safe distance, it had never once occurred to me that he might know anything about me. Not even something as simple as my name. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay." The drive was a blur of dark highways and the low hum of the truck's engine. I sat huddled in the passenger seat, swallowed by his jacket, clutching a cup of lukewarm gas station coffee he had insisted on buying me. The silence inside the cab was a universe away from the chaos we had left behind. It was a different kind of silence than the one in my apartment, though. It wasn't empty. It was filled with his presence, with the scent of coffee and mint from the air freshener dangling from his rearview mirror, and with the thousand things I was too afraid to say. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. His large hands rested easily on the steering wheel, his profile illuminated by the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. He seemed completely at ease, a stark contrast to the frantic energy still thrumming under my skin. The architect of my quiet fantasies was driving me to a cabin in the woods in the middle of the night. My life had officially left the rails. The cabin was small and simple, nestled among tall, dark pines. It was one room, mostly, with a kitchenette against one wall, a worn leather sofa in front of a stone fireplace, and a large bed tucked into an alcove. It was the complete opposite of my stark, minimalist apartment. The walls were warm, unfinished wood. Books were stacked in precarious piles. A half-finished carving of a bird sat on a workbench in the corner, surrounded by wood shavings. The whole place felt lived in, real. It smelled of pine and wood smoke in him. "It's not much," he said, flicking on a few lamps that cast a soft, golden glow over the room. "It's nice," I said, and I meant it. It felt safe. The noise of the city, the screech of the alarm, it all felt a million miles away. He moved around the space with a quiet efficiency, starting a fire in the hearth. The crackle of the kindling catching flame was a soothing sound. I stood awkwardly by the door, still wrapped in his jacket, feeling like an intruder in this deeply personal space. "You can lose the jacket," he said, his back to me as he prodded the logs with a poker. "Make yourself at home. I think I have some tea." I slipped the heavy coat from my shoulders and draped it over the back of a chair. The chill of the room hit me immediately, and I hugged my arms to my chest. He turned and saw me shivering in my thin pajamas. "Right," he said, a soft sigh. "You need clothes." He disappeared into a small alcove that I presumed was a closet and returned with a pair of gray sweatpants and a dark blue t-shirt. "They'll be big on you," he said, holding them out to me. "But they're clean." Our fingers brushed as I took the clothes from him. It was the smallest, most insignificant of touches, but a jolt went through me all the same. His skin was warm and slightly calloused. "Thank you," I mumbled, my gaze fixed on the soft, worn cotton in my hands. "Bathroom's through there," he said, nodding toward a small door. "I'll get that tea started." In the small, clean bathroom, I changed out of my pajamas. The sweatpants were ridiculously long, and I had to roll the waistband twice. The t-shirt hung off my shoulders, the collar wide on my neck. But they were soft and warm, and they smelled unmistakably of him. That clean, laundry and sawdust scent. I buried my face in the fabric for a moment, inhaling deeply. It was an alarmingly intimate act, wearing his clothes, being surrounded by his scent. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a lost child, swimming in clothes that weren't mine, my hair a mess, my eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and a strange, terrifying hope. When I came back out, he had 2 steaming mugs on the small wooden table. He was sitting on the sofa, staring into the now roaring fire. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes lingered on me for a second. A strange expression flickered across his face, something I couldn't quite decipher, before he gestured to the spot beside him. "Tea's ready," he said. I sat down, carefully keeping a respectable distance between us on the worn leather cushions. He passed me a mug. The ceramic was warm against my cold hands. We drank in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the whisper of the wind in the pines outside. The quiet should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It was comfortable, companionable. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, gentle. "Leo, you're a graphic designer, right?" "In for it." My heart did a little flip. "Yeah," I said, surprised again that he knew. "How did you?" "Saw the name on your mail once," he admitted, a faint hint of a smile touching his lips. "And I see the glow from your monitor under the door sometimes when I come home late. Figured you were some kind of artist." He had noticed me. He had noticed the light under my door. The thought was staggering. I had spent months thinking of myself as invisible, a ghost haunting the hallway, and all this time, he had seen me. "You're an architect?" I asked, wanting to show that I had noticed him, too, though I couldn't admit the extent of my observations. He shook his head. "Close. I build things. Custom furniture, mostly. Some structural work. The cabin was my first big project." He gestured around the room with his mug. "Built it with my dad, years ago." "It's beautiful," I said, and the words felt inadequate. "It's solid," he corrected gently. "It's got good bones." He took a sip of his tea, his gaze returning to the fire. "I come out here when the city gets too loud. When I need to remember what solid feels like." He paused, then looked at me, his expression serious. "I'm sorry about all this. The alarm, dragging you out here. It must have been a lot." It was the glimpse of vulnerability, the crack in the confident facade. He was apologizing for saving me. He was admitting that he, too, sometimes found the world to be too much. It was a bridge, extended across the space between us. "It's okay," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Thank you, Julian." Hearing his name on my lips felt both strange and right. He smiled, a real, small smile this time. "You're welcome, Leo." We sat like that for a long time, the silence stretching out again, but this time it was different. It was charged, filled with a new awareness. I was intensely conscious of the space between us, of the warmth radiating from his body. I could feel the subtle shift of the cushion every time he moved. The firelight danced across the planes of his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight stubble there. My carefully constructed walls were gone, and in their place was this raw, terrifying, and exhilarating proximity. Every nerve in my body felt alive, humming with a quiet, dangerous energy. Eventually, the exhaustion of the night began to settle deep in my bones. I caught myself yawning, a huge, jaw-cracking thing I couldn't stifle. Julian noticed. "You should get some sleep," he said, his voice soft. He stood up, stretching his arms over his head. The movement pulled his t-shirt taut across his broad chest, and I had to quickly look away, a flush of heat rising in my cheeks. "You can take the bed," he said, nodding toward the alcove. "I'll be fine on the couch." "No," I said immediately, the protest automatic. Guilt warred with a desperate, unspoken desire. "No, this is your place. I can't take your bed. I'll take the couch." He looked from the couch to me, then back again. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. "It's not very comfortable," he said. "The bed's big enough for two. If you're okay with that." The question hung in the air, a loaded, pivotal thing. This was the precipice, the point of no return. My mind screamed at me to say no, to retreat to the safety of the couch, to rebuild some semblance of a boundary. But my heart, that traitorous, hopeful thing, was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I thought of my cold, empty apartment, of the years of quiet, lonely nights. And then I looked at him, standing there in the warm, golden firelight, offering a simple, terrifying kindness. "Okay," I whispered, the sound barely audible. "If you're sure." He just nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure." Getting into the bed felt like stepping into another dimension. The sheets were cool and crisp, but they smelled of him, a clean, comforting scent that wrapped around me. He turned off the main lamps, leaving only the soft, flickering glow of the dying fire. The room was cast in shadows and soft edges. He got in on the other side, his weight dipping the mattress. He was careful to leave a wide, yawning chasm of space between us, a no-man's land of cool sheets and unspoken tension. We lay there on our backs, staring up at the dark, wood-paneled ceiling. The silence was absolute now, broken only by the crackle of the embers in the hearth and the sound of our own breathing. My entire body was a tightly wound coil of awareness. I could feel the heat of him across the distance, a magnetic pull I was fighting with every ounce of my self-control. I could hear the slow, steady beat of his heart, or maybe it was my own. I couldn't tell. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Sleep was an impossible dream. My mind was a whirlwind of everything that had happened, everything that was happening right now. Julian, the impossible man from across the hall, was lying next to me in the dark. The reality of it was too much to contain. Then he shifted. The mattress creaked softly as he rolled onto his side, facing me. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper that seemed to vibrate right through me. I couldn't speak. I just managed a small, jerky nod. There was another long pause. Then, the sound of movement again, closer this time. I felt the air shift beside me. A large, warm hand came to rest on my shoulder, the weight of it both a comfort and a terror. His thumb began to draw slow, soothing circles against my collarbone, a gentle, questioning touch. My carefully constructed world dissolved into nothing. Every fear, every rule, every wall I had ever built simply ceased to exist. There was only the darkness, the firelight, and the weight of his hand on my skin. Slowly, I turned my head to look at him. His face was only inches from mine, his features softened by the shadows. His eyes were dark and serious, searching mine for something. Permission, maybe. Reassurance. I don't know what he saw in my expression, but it must have been enough. He leaned in, closing the small distance between us. His movements were slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't a collision. It was a question. The touch was soft, tentative, unbelievably gentle. It was just a brief, chaste pressure, but it sent a shockwave through my entire system. He started to pull back, but I made a small, involuntary sound in the back of my throat, a noise of pure, undiluted want. That was all the answer he needed. He deepened the kiss, his other hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. And I kissed him back, all the months of silent, secret yearning pouring into that one, impossible moment. It was slow and deep, and it tasted of wood smoke and tea and a profound, terrifying relief. The order of my life was gone, shattered into a million pieces. And in its place was this beautiful, brilliant, breathtaking chaos. The morning light that filtered through the cabin window felt harsh, accusatory. It illuminated every dust mote in the air, every awkward angle of the new day. The warmth and intimacy of the night had evaporated with the darkness, leaving a thick, suffocating silence in its wake. We woke up tangled together, my head on his chest, his arm draped possessively over my waist. For a blissful, groggy moment, it felt right. It felt perfect. Then consciousness returned with a brutal clarity, and I froze. I carefully, slowly, extricated myself from his hold. He stirred but didn't wake. I slid out of the bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor. His clothes felt like a costume now, a reminder of a role I had no right to play. The awkwardness was a physical entity in the room, a third person watching my every move. I couldn't look at the bed. I couldn't look at him. My anxiety, which had been blissfully dormant, came roaring back to life. It was a tidal wave of self-recrimination and doubt. What had I done? What had we done? My mind, my cruel, analytical mind, started playing the night back in excruciating detail, but this time it stripped away all the magic, leaving only the cold, hard facts. There was a crisis. He was being kind. I was vulnerable. He had taken pity on a scared, pathetic neighbor. The kiss was a mistake. A moment of shared insanity brought on by adrenaline and firelight. A lapse in judgment he surely regretted more than I could possibly imagine. I had ruined it. I had taken his simple, human kindness and twisted it into something else. I had projected all my lonely fantasies onto him, and in a moment of weakness, he had what? Played along. Been too polite to stop me? The shame was a hot, coiling thing in my stomach. I had broken the most important rule of my museum. Do not touch the art. Now I had not only touched it, I had smeared my desperate fingerprints all over it. The friendship, the comfortable neighborly distance we could have had, I had destroyed it. He started to stir, and a fresh wave of panic washed over me. I couldn't face him. I couldn't handle the pity in his eyes, or worse, the polite, distant coldness of regret. I had to get out of there. Julian sat up, running a hand through his already messy hair. He looked at me, his expression groggy and unreadable. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Hi," I squeaked, my voice an octave too high. I was busying myself with folding the clothes he'd lent me, creating a task to avoid making eye contact. I should go. See if we can get back into the building." His silence was damning. I could feel his eyes on me, and I was certain he was seeing right through my flimsy excuses. He was quiet for what felt like an eternity. He was letting me go. He was giving me an out because he didn't know how to tell me that last night meant nothing. The confirmation of my worst fears was a bitter pill. "I made coffee," he said finally, his voice flat. He gestured with his head toward the kitchenette, where a French press sat on the counter. His apparent normalcy was somehow worse than an outright rejection. He was acting as if nothing had happened, as if the earth-shattering, life-altering event of the previous night was just a footnote. He was pretending, for my sake, and the politeness of it was excruciating. The emotional chasm between us felt 1,000 times wider than the physical one that had been in the bed. "No, thank you," I said, my voice tight. "I really should. I need to get back." I placed the neatly folded clothes on the chair, a pathetic offering of peace. "Thank you for everything. The jacket, the place to stay." I couldn't bring myself to mention the rest. I turned to leave, my hand on the doorknob, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I just had to get through the next 30 seconds. Just get out the door, get back to my apartment, and spend the rest of my life trying to forget the feel of his lips on mine. "Leo," his voice stopped me. It wasn't flat anymore. It was firm, commanding. I froze, my back still to him. "Wait," he said. "Don't go." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself. This was it. The talk. The gentle letdown. I was just caught up in the moment speech. "I hope this doesn't make things weird" conversation that would, inevitably, make things weirder than I could possibly imagine. "Turn around," he said, his voice softer now, but no less insistent. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned to face him. He had gotten out of bed and was standing in the middle of the room, wearing only his jeans from the night before. The morning light fell across his bare chest, and for a heart-stopping moment, all I could do was stare. He looked solid, real, and impossibly handsome. And his eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't regret. "We need to talk about last night," he said, and my stomach plummeted. "You don't have to," I rushed to say, the words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. "It's fine. I get it. It was a weird night. A lot happened. It was a mistake. We can just forget it. I won't make it awkward, I promise." He took a step closer to me, then another, until he was standing just a few feet away. He listened to my frantic rambling with a patient, serious expression. When I finally ran out of steam, he just looked at me for a long moment. "Was it a mistake, Leo?" he asked, his voice quiet. My throat was dry. I couldn't answer. "Because it didn't feel like a mistake to me," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "It felt like something I've wanted to do for a very long time." The world tilted on its axis. My brain struggled to compute his words. They didn't fit the narrative I had so carefully constructed in my head, the one where I was the lonely fool and he was the kind, straight stranger. "But," I thought. I stammered, gesturing vaguely. "The woman. I saw you with a woman a while ago." A look of confusion, then dawning realization, crossed his face. "The woman?" He thought for a second. "With the red hair? Laughing all the time?" I nodded mutely. A soft, genuine laugh escaped him. It was a warm, wonderful sound. "Leo," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was Sarah? That's my sister." Sister. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the cabin. His sister. Not his girlfriend. Not his wife. The entire foundation of my carefully constructed theory of his unattainability crumbled into dust. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. The single syllable was pathetic, freighted with months of misunderstanding and foolish assumptions. Yeah. Oh, he took the final step, closing the distance between us completely. He reached out, his hands coming to rest gently on my shoulders. His touch was warm, grounding, just as it had been in the hallway. I've been noticing you for a lot longer than you think, he confessed, his gaze intense, unwavering. I see you leave for your morning run. I hear your keyboard clicking late at night. I wanted to talk to you, to ask you out, about 100 times. But you always seemed so contained, so in your own world. I didn't know how to get in. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. He wanted to ask me out. Him, Julian. So when I saw you in the hall last night, he continued, his thumb stroking my collarbone in that same, mesmerizing way. And you looked so terrified. I'm not proud of it, but my first thought wasn't about the fire. It was, this is it. This is my chance. The confession was so honest, so vulnerable, it stole the air from my lungs. He hadn't been acting out of pity. He had been acting out of want. The same want that had been a secret, painful ache inside of me for so long. I've been watching you too, I admitted, the words coming out in a rush of relieved honesty. For months. I thought you were. I just thought it was impossible. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. It transformed him, chasing away the last of the morning's tension. Is it? He whispered. And this time, I was the one who leaned in. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no questioning. It was sure and deep and hungry. It was a release of all the pent-up longing, all the mistaken assumptions, all the lonely nights. It was the demolition of the final wall. His arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his warm, solid body. I tangled my fingers in his hair, pulling him closer still. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't chaos. It was home. It felt like coming home. Returning to the apartment building later that day felt like stepping back into a world that was both familiar and entirely new. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the hallways, a ghostly reminder of the chaos that had thrown us together. But the building itself no longer felt like a collection of separate, sealed-off units. It felt like a place full of possibilities. My own apartment, for A, and his, for B, weren't just opposite doors anymore. They were two ends of a bridge that had finally, miraculously, been built. The first few days were a delicate, wonderful dance of discovery. We had a secret, a shared world that existed in the space between our two doors. A stolen glance in the hallway as I left to get groceries became charged with meaning. A text from him in the middle of the day, thinking of you, was enough to make my focus shatter, my heart skip a beat. The quiet, ordered life I had known was gone, replaced by this thrumming, joyful uncertainty. Our first real date wasn't a grand affair. It was just him, knocking on my door on a Tuesday night, holding a bag of takeout from the Thai place down the street. Figured you might be tired of cooking for one, he'd said with a small, almost shy smile. We ate sitting on my floor, because I didn't own a proper dining table, and it was perfect. He didn't comment on the sparseness of my apartment or the obsessive way my books were organized by color. He just seemed to accept my world, and me in it, completely. I learned the small, intimate details of his life, the ones I could never have guessed from across the hall. I learned that he was a terrible singer, but hummed constantly when he was working. I learned that he had a deep, abiding fear of spiders that was completely at odds with his strong, capable exterior. I learned that the cello music I'd heard wasn't a recording. It was him. He owned a beautiful, darkwood cello that he played, as he put it, badly, but with feeling, whenever he felt stressed. In return, I found myself opening up in ways I never thought possible. I showed him the designs I was most proud of, explaining the intricate theories behind my font choices and color palettes. He listened with a genuine interest that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. I told him about my anxiety, about the walls I built to keep myself safe. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened, and when I was done, he reached out and took my hand, his thumb stroking my palm. Your walls are impressive, he said, his voice soft. But I'm glad I found a way in. One evening, we were on his couch, a documentary about deep-sea life playing softly on the television. I was leaning against him, his arm a warm, solid weight around my shoulders. The scent of him, sawdust and his soap and just him, was a constant, comforting presence. It was a quiet, domestic moment, the kind of simple intimacy I had only ever dreamed of. Suddenly, the smoke detector in his kitchen let out a series of sharp, ear-splitting beeps. The toast he'd put in the toaster a few minutes earlier had started to burn. We both froze. For a split second, I was back in the hallway, the world ending, panic seizing my limbs. My heart leaped into my throat. Then Julian started to laugh. It was a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest and through me. He got up, waving a dish towel at the detector until it fell silent, and pulled the blackened toast from the machine. He turned back to me, a wide, conspiratorial grin on his face. "See," he said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "False alarm. Good thing I'm here to pull you close." I laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh that felt like a release. The callback, the inside joke that was ours alone, was a beautiful, perfect thing. It was a testament to how far we'd come. The sound that had once symbolized the shattering of my world now felt like the punchline to the best story of my life. Later that night, lying in his bed, our bed, now more often than not, I watched him sleep. The firelight from his hearth, he insisted on a fire even when it wasn't cold, danced across his sleeping face. In the quiet of the room, I thought about the man I had been just a few weeks ago, the lonely archivist in his sterile museum. I had curated a life of perfect, predictable safety. I had mistaken order for peace and solitude for strength. I had believed, with every fiber of my being, that the walls I had built were necessary for my survival. But a fortress is also a prison. I had been so focused on protecting myself from pain that I had inadvertently locked out any possibility of joy. It took a screaming alarm and a night of total chaos to force me out of my self-imposed cage. It took a kind, steady man who saw past the walls to the lonely person hiding behind them. Julian hadn't torn my walls down. He had just quietly opened the door and waited for me to be brave enough to walk through it. His hand found mine in his sleep, his fingers lacing through my own with an unconscious, easy familiarity. The simple, solid weight of it was an anchor. I was still Leo. I was still anxious. I still preferred quiet to noise and order to chaos. But I was no longer alone in my museum. Someone else was in here with me now, his warm presence filling the echoing halls, his low, rumbling laugh making the old artifacts shine. The fire alarm had been the end of my quiet, ordered world. And it was, without a doubt, the very best thing that had ever happened to me.